Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the 1 and 0 podcast. My name's Joel Haas.
I'm Avery Hill.
I'm Lyle Alenstein.
Today, we're going to be talking about some recent transfer portal news for Penn State. We're also going to touch on some early preseason rankings that we've seen come out recently, and then we'll end it with a question or two from you guys. So to start, transfer portal. In last week's episode, we kind of said the portal was closed. Effectively, we thought Penn State got away relatively unharmed. We thought it was like 4 portal entrants. And then pretty much a couple hours after the podcast dropped, we saw like 5 more guys hop in the portal. The next day we saw another one. So I think it was 6
Yeah.
in total. Just a crazy day. And like we said, even though the portal was technically closed, as long as you announce your intent to declare before it closes, then you can still go in. So they got that paperwork finished, hopped on in. As far as the impact on the overall depth chart, I don't see it changing too much. I think King Mac is kind of the only one there that really makes a difference. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think King Mac overall is the only real loss in terms of immediate impact next year. I think he had that fourth safety spot behind Jalen Reed, Kevin Winston Jr., and Zakee Wheatley. But I think he was a pretty highly touted recruit with a big pedigree. I just thought it was interesting to see him go because I think he wants immediate impact right away, whatever he wants to go. So I think that was the only real loss. But I just think it's interesting because you're seeing time at that fourth safety spot, regardless of wherever he is on the depth chart, whether it be in a
Yeah.
blowout. I still think he's getting snaps regardless, but I think he just wants a starting role would be my only reason. Obviously, I don't know what's going on in his life, relationships with with the coaching staff and players. So that's that. I think outside of King Mac, though, I guess Malik McLean, it's like you don't really know because whatever is going on with the wide receiver room. I guess he could have saw some snaps just while they're still figuring things out. Obviously, Franklin talked about he's looking for some people to still separate themselves. So other than that, I don't really think anybody. Obviously, you saw the running backs go. I think they saw the writing on the wall with in terms of London Montgomery, David Kensey. I thought they just with Cam Wallace, Quinn Martin in front of them. Obviously, with a bunch of recruits coming in, they shot no shot. They're like, all right, let me get out of here while I can. So that's my overall thought so far.
Yeah, and I mean, just off of that, I think maybe for King Mac, yeah, again, that's the big loss. But outside of that, you don't really have anything crazy. I mean, you had Golden Israel Chumba. He hadn't really played much before, and he only had 1 or 2 years left anyway. So it's like, and then obviously, they had to cut the scholarship limit. So I think some of those losses were just losses that they were like, okay, cool, fine. And even the running backs, I think they had a good chance to get film in the spring game. And then after that, it's like, cool, they can hit the portal, have some film to kind of work with. So, yeah, overall, I don't think if there's any big losses outside of, I think, King Mac. I expect a lot out of King Mac this year. That's a big loss.
Yeah, the Mac one was interesting because it was like right after he hopped in the portal, we saw that he planned to take a visit to Alabama. So it seems like they're kind of a leader there in terms of recruiting him, but that also kind of tells you like how impactful of a transfer that is. I mean, he would have been on the 2 deep, probably not a starter this year. But yeah, him getting that interest from Alabama right away, which I mean, some people, not me, but some people were saying that that seems like tampering. Just so they had that visit set up, within an hour of him hopping in the portal. Who knows? Um, we don't have any inside info there, so we can't say for sure. But no, I thought that was really interesting. And that's kind of a rare case where a guy leaves Penn State and ends up at a like higher profile school, if that makes sense. Because we've seen from the guys who've transferred out who have committed to other spots, like KLS is going to Auburn, which is a good school for sure, but also, just lost 2 games to Penn State, right? And they're kind of in that 6-6 range right now. They're kind of rebuilding
Yeah.
as a program. So you go there, you're probably not, competing for the playoff like you would at Penn State. Same with Malik Mega, where he's going to Coastal Carolina, which, definitely an increase in usage there. He'll get more snaps for sure, but not necessarily an upgrade in terms of the school that he's going to. And I feel like that's just kind of been a trend recently where Penn State's not really losing guys to schools above it. It's losing guys to schools below it just because they weren't getting enough playing time at Penn State. And I think if you have to, like, you never want to lose guys to the portal, but if you have to choose, you would rather lose guys who are lower on the depth chart who just want to play more, as opposed to guys at the top of the depth chart who want to play somewhere else.
I agree with that. It's kind of like addition by subtraction. Obviously, they've also got like, I think right now they've got 90 guys on scholarship, and like the thing is like
They're
80.
still, yeah, they're still over.
Yeah. So like obviously there's like ways around it with NIL, I feel like. So I feel like part of it's like because Franklin talked about post blue white. He was like, they have those 30-minute meetings with like everybody, like once like the spring window ended because it was the last practice. And I feel like those were conversations that he kind of knew going into it, where he could have recommended you guys. Obviously, I don't know what's going on over there, but he could have been like, might be a better opportunity for you somewhere else, or you're not going to see time. Obviously, guys could have seen writing on the wall. They're like, might be a better option for me. But I agree with your point. It's like so far from what we've seen, it's not a lot of guys going to schools that are in the same tier, even above Penn State. It's obviously so far it's been relatively a step down. And obviously you've KLS, but it's like Penn State's beat them the past 2 years, so not really many people are batting an eye at that. And also because a lot of people saw the writing on a wall with KLS mid-season last year, and it's like regardless, he was listed for most not recruiting sites, but sites just as a top receiver in the portal. But it's like based on the nature of what happened last year, it's like I don't really think too many Penn State fans are concerned about it.
Yeah, I think the timing of it too tells me that it has to be something scholarship related because the other transfers they came well before. Some might have come after spring games, some might have come before, but when it comes literally the day after the portal closes, meaning they probably had that conversation within that week or so, I would say that is a factor, even though that would confuse me on the King Mack situation because I don't think that's a guy you just let go.
So sort of moving on from that, I want to get into some of these preseason rankings that are starting to drop. We're starting to get into that time of the year. There's not too much to talk about other than these rankings. So we'll take a look at a few of them. I know you guys saw the On3 tight end recruiting rankings. It was the top 10 tight end rooms in the country. And Penn State did not make the cut. I know I was scanning down it, like looking for Penn State, just didn't see them at all in the top 10. Georgia was number 1, Michigan number 2. Understandable. But I feel like that's kind of a big miss there to not have Penn State as one of your top 10 tight end units in the country. I feel like you guys probably agree, but in my mind, they're at least probably top 5. So to not have them in the top 10 at all felt a little bit disrespectful to me.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you're looking at Tyler Warren, you can make an argument as a top, if not the top tight end in the country, I think personally. Just also not even looking at the room itself, but you look at the nature of the room in the past couple of years. They've been sending guys to the NFL. We got Theo Johnson this past year, who people were making the argument that Tyler Warren could have been better than him this past season, just like from the talent and like a future skill set perspective leading into being an NFL draft prospect. But Theo Johnson, Brent Strange, then you saw Gesicki, Muth. Just you've seen the pedigree of what Penn State's putting out at tight end. And Luke Reynolds, obviously, he's a really highly touted recruit from most recruiting sites. Rapole has shown flashes. Obviously, you've got Khalil Fourth Down Dinkins, who's catching touchdowns. Obviously, I don't really see much of a role for him in the passing game other than the red zone, but I just think it's a miss. I think Penn State definitely top 10 for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I think they're definitely top 10. I mean, again, just off of what you said, being tight end you, that is something that's factored in to preseason because regardless, you haven't seen the units together. So sometimes you compile what they did last season. Of course, you have a big time recruit. I think that should also be a really big factor, especially with Reynolds. So yeah, just a miss. I agree with everything Lyle said.
Okay. One of the other rankings that I thought was interesting, Joel Klatt, fellow Joel, dropped his top 25 rankings preseason. I don't know how much you guys got to look at that, but Penn State came in at 9. Do you guys think that's kind of a fair placement? I didn't really have much of a problem with it, but I don't know if you guys had any thoughts about kind of where they landed there.
Yeah, I think 9, 8 has been the range. Most recruiting sites I've seen on recruiting rights, like rankings have been put out for the top 25 way too early for Penn State. I saw Athletic had him, I think that was the lowest I saw him. It was at 16. I think the 10, 8, 9, 10 range is pretty fair. Obviously, the question marks are really around the wide receiver room and if Drew can perform in the big games. So I think based on the nature of how last season, obviously Ole Miss has been consensusly higher than them. And obviously we all saw what they did to Penn State last year. So I think that's a big question mark. And then I think the defense is the only thing that's really consistent with how the teams are being viewed them. Obviously, you got the departure of Manny Diaz, but it's a lot of returning talent, and even the talent that's lost, it's guys that are just next in line that have been looked at as pretty highly regarded. So that's my overall gist of how I think they're being played and looked at so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would have had them maybe 11 or 12, but I can see why you put them at 9. I mean, for me, not putting them there would just be kind of the losses that they had. They were again 2 first-round losses. I mean, those are big losses. I think there's still some questions in the not the defensive backfield, because I think the safeties are fine, but you don't know what we're getting from the corners until they really suited up this year. I mean, AJ Harris, Kimber, possibly Jalen Reed. So we don't really know what we're getting there. And then even I think on the other side, again, the receiver room is a question, but I think them being number 9 is something that is like a testament to how people, view Kolodnicki and Allen on those sides. Because I think those are the 2 big differences between this year and last year.
Yeah, I think 9 is fair. I think if anything, that might be a little bit too high. Just because, like you guys mentioned, there's some questions specifically corner and receiver. We're not really sure if anyone's going to be able to step up there, and they're kind of losing a lot from those rooms. Um, One thing that's interesting is Michigan was at number 8, which I know they're coming, off a national championship game, but they also had 13 NFL draft picks.
Yeah.
Um, and to me, it just feels like it's pretty inevitable that there's going to be a big fall off, especially when you lose your head coach. And I know he took a lot of the coordinators with him. There's just so much to replace there in Ann Arbor that 8 to me feels high for Michigan. And again, I know they just came off a national championship, but I feel like Penn State might be in a better spot than Michigan going into next season. I don't know if you guys would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Michigan, again, as you said, yeah, they should have. I think they would have dropped in my rankings as well. I mean, you think about the loss that they had at 13 draft picks. I mean, they did add Barham from Maryland, but that's kind of just one guy. So I think, and you think about the competition aspect. I mean, look at they got to go. They have got to go through Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, USC, like in the whole Big Ten. So that's not an easy pass. So I think 8 is just about right for them. But I think Penn State, again, yeah, I think they are in a better position because they're also coming up from where they finished last season.
Yeah, I agree and disagree. I think the coordinator thing and obviously all that talent going to the NFL, as well as Harbaugh, is a big thing. I think on paper, Penn State's got a better roster in terms of talent perspective. But at the end of the day, you look at, and then the schedule. I think Penn State's got an easier schedule. I think Ohio State is the real game. Obviously, you can argue USC, West Virginia's a trap game. We talked about it in one of the previous episodes. But Michigan, I think they've got a harder schedule. I think if it's not week 1, it's in the first 2 weeks. They play Texas. So it's like, I think that's a tough draw, especially. Texas proved that they were a top team last year. So I think that's tough. They've got a lot of returning talent. But also, I think Michigan, regardless of what's on the roster, Penn State has had trouble with them, even if they've had an equal roster, even a better roster within the past few years. And it's always just been something that's been hard for them to overcome. Even with Ohio State, obviously, I think Ohio State's, regardless of the success in the recent years, I think they've always had a more talented roster than Michigan. But it's hard for Penn State to overcome those 2 teams. And I think regardless on who's the roster, I think Michigan will always have a slightly upper hand going into it. So I think I can see why they have more respect in these preseason rankings than Penn State.
Yeah, Ohio State's at number 1 also, which I think I like that. I would probably pick them to win the national championship next year just based on the amount of returning pieces. They only had 4 players drafted this year, which, some people might view that as a bad thing, but when you really get into it, they had so many guys return who didn't have to. When you look at the pieces they have coming back, especially on the defense, I know they have a bunch of guys. I think like JTT, Jack Sawyer, I want to say. And then on offense, I think it's Travion Henderson's coming back. Like he could have left. They had a ton of guys who could have gone to the NFL and been high draft picks this year who decided to come back. And then what they're bringing in the transfer portal as well. There's just so much talent on that roster. We saw their defense take a big step up last year. Their offense, they've got a new offensive coordinator. So they're hoping for some big improvement there. I mean, I think Ohio State's the team to beat going into next year. So again, they're at number 1 in these rankings. Oregon's at number 4, representing the Big Ten there. And then Michigan, Penn State, 8, 9. USC's at 15. I think that's fair. And then you get toward the end, and Nebraska's at number 22. I don't know how you guys feel about Nebraska, but I think they were 5-7 last year. So still haven't made a bowl game for like 6 or 7 years. But now they're in this top 25. I don't know if you guys think they're going to turn it around this year.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I get the Matt Rule hype, I guess, and I got Dylan Raiola. Obviously, that's this year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he should be the start. He'll be a true freshman, but he should be starting.
Like, yeah, I guess. I don't really know. I'm not really tapped into their schedule. I mean, obviously Dylan Raiola, he's top QB recruit, decommitted from Ohio State. So I guess they think he's that kind of talent, that kind of buzz. I mean, I guess I could see a little preseason hype. But at the end of the day, these are way too early rankings. I mean, I wouldn't really look at them too much. I mean, like, you got so much Big Ten in there too. So I guess they're respecting the Big Ten, but I don't really know. I don't get it. I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would have Nebraska maybe 40, 44 if you ask me. I think they are on the uprising, even though they were 5-7. A lot of their losses were close losses. I think outside of Michigan, like a lot in Colorado, early season Colorado. I think a lot of their losses were close losses. I think Matt Rule is building a program, and with Raiola, and I think they have the chance to get up to 40, 35. I don't think they'll hit the top 25 this year, but hey, maybe they surprise us.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that they're going to make a bowl game, probably have a winning record. But being ranked, to me at least, feels a little bit high. I think you guys are probably on the same page there. And then the only other Big Ten team in the rankings, Iowa comes in at number 24, which just feels like such a perfect spot for them. I feel like every single year you can pencil in Iowa at 24 exactly, and that's where they'll start and that's where they'll finish at the end of the year. So Penn State lost a decent amount of players recently to the portal, but they're also losing Keon Wiley to injury. First reported by On3 Sports, he'll be out for a significant amount of time. We're not sure the exact timeline on that, but I assume that means he'll miss at least the start of the season. And that's at a position where they're already a little bit weak now at linebacker. You send Curtis Jacobs to the draft, and then you have Abdul Carter switching to defensive end. So you were already a little bit weak there, and now you lose a guy who you thought was probably going to be a contributor this year. So how do you guys see the room kind of shaping up now without those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big blow. I mean, I think in terms of rotation, I think it messes up the rotation. If you ask me, I would be sliding in Kobe King at the mic, probably Rojas at the weak side, and maybe DeLuca on the strong side. But even with Rojas, I think he bulked up to what, 232. That's like 34 since he arrived. So I think he can really move around. He can really be your Mike or be your weak side. I mean, I think I would have slotted in Wiley right behind Rojas. So a really big playing time chance for him that kind of went away, obviously, unfortunately, due to injury. And I think even for Rojas, he doesn't get the chance to be as versatile as he would like to. So I think it's definitely a big blow, and I think Frank to get in the portal.
Yeah, I think everyone talks about lack of wide receiver depth, but then you look at the other side of the ball, and linebacker doesn't really have that many proven commodities outside of the guys you just talked about: Rojas, DeLuca, Kobe King. I think Wiley was going to be a big part of that two deep. I thought he was going to have a lot of snaps, good opportunities. I mean, last year I think he finished 17 tackles, I think 3 sacks by the time it concluded. So I think he was a big impact guy. But you look outside the guys we just talked about, and then I think Tyler Elsden's the only one that really saw snaps. Obviously, Tamir Robinson and Kevin, these are guys that got some preseason buzz, but it's like you don't really know what they're going to give you. And obviously, you could look in the portal. I know there was some interest, I guess, in Elijah Herring from Tennessee. I don't think he's really taken a visit. I mean, he's been at Colorado, spending most of his time taking a visit there. But I think that's something you can address in the portal, or you're going to have a younger guy step up because obviously we don't know the significance of the injury, and he could be fine come camp, but obviously because we're in May. But you never really know. So I just think that's an overall loss.
Looking at even the safety room, I think you'll have to move somebody in certain situations. I know they like to stack the box a lot. I know even you had Reed coming in, you had a lot of guys that'll come into the box. So I think sometimes you'll have to actually just slot them in as the weak side linebacker. I think that'll kind of make the difference. I think even if they go in the portal, I think someone will have to come down anyway. Now that someone's hurt, someone's going to have to come down and play, not just play linebacker, they'll play both, but definitely come down.
I'll be interested to see if they play more of a 4-2-5 this year, just because I feel like they're pretty confident in what they have on the defensive line, and maybe not as much at linebacker. And I think Allen ran base 4-2-5 at Indiana mostly, which is a little bit different from what Diaz has been running here. So that'll be interesting to watch just kind of what personnel, what kind of formations they're using on the defensive side. That'll kind of give you some insight into how they feel about, the linebacker position, how confident they are in those guys. But we can go ahead and move on to questions now. So the first question I want to get into from J Tuman 21, which freshman on the team are you most excited about, either for next year or long term?
For me, I think I would say Jalen Harvey. I don't think this year is his year. He might play a little bit on the back end, or any blowouts, you might see him a little bit. And I think it'll be him though. I think coming out, he was a 3-star coming out of Quince Orchard. Same place that Chop Robinson. He's wearing the same number that Chop's wearing. Even I know his coach, he was talking about him. He said that his get off is kind of his best trait. That's the exact resemblance of Chop Robinson. He's 6'2". He's not the biggest guy. So I think that he has a chance to really grow and blow up here at Penn State, if he's able to play and get some rotational minutes late in the season or just in next season. He has a lot of time.
For me, in the short term, Lexi and I talked about this in a previous episode. I think Cooper Cousins, Luke Reynolds, only the real guys that can see the field this year, if they do at all. But I think for me, long-term guy is Garrett Sexton. He's an O-line on the O-line. He was 6'5", 195 his sophomore year in high school playing quarterback. And then obviously took more of the physical side of the game, moved to the line. I think he finished his senior year around 260, came to campus. Now he's 295, I'm pretty sure. Put on some weight. I know he's dealt with a little bit of bumps and bruises, and obviously not going to see the field at any time at all this year, with considering how deep the starting group is in the O-line. But I think it's just a testament for what Phil Trautwein's done these past couple of years, developing the O-line as well as recruiting. You've seen Vega Ioane, Anthony Donko, just keep piling on and on, guys that can make a viable impact on the line, regardless if they're playing or not, or they're just seeing rotational snaps. And I just think Sexton's a guy. He was a 4-star. He's got that pedigree. I think with some proper development, obviously playing alongside the guys that have been there for a couple of years, I think come next season or maybe his junior year, I think he could have a real shot at even making a shot at the NFL. I mean, you've seen it. Guys are going to the league. NFL teams are reaching on the Penn State guys, and I think he's got a good shot at that.
Yeah, going from quarterback to offensive line is kind of crazy, dude. I've seen quarterback to tight end a lot. I feel like that's a pretty common transition, but the offensive line is a big switch. But I mean, if the staff is confident in him, if they feel and I mean, he got that 4-star rating for a reason. So maybe there's a really high ceiling there. A guy who's kind of new to the position, still has a lot of growth to do. You never know. He could really be a big contributor. And yeah, like you mentioned, we kind of wanted to avoid the obvious answers with this one. So we took out some kind of the top recruits there in the class, but I do want to touch on Quentin Martin, which, Penn State fans are probably familiar with the name after the blue-white game. You saw him a little bit there. You're probably not going to see him much this year. He might lock in that RB3 spot. That's kind of what I would predict right now, behind Singleton and Catron. But then going into next year, in his sophomore season, he could lock down the full-time starter position, RB1, in just his sophomore year, and he would have 2 years there to really put up some numbers. I think he has a really impressive tape from what we've seen. We've heard good stuff about him. And then the blue-white game kind of proved it, what he's capable of there. Again, going against the second team, basically, defense, so you don't want to read too much into it, but still a solid showing there. And he was a highly touted recruit as well. So there's a lot of guys in this freshman class. I mean, we just talked about 3 of them. We've talked about some other ones previously: Cousins, Reynolds, even Grunkemeyer at quarterback. There's a lot of guys there who I think could be really good eventually. But there's just so much talent on the roster already that not many of them are going to maybe make an impact this year, even though, over the next couple of years, these are names that, fans are going to want to know. So moving on from that one, we can kind of get into our next question here. DMP coverage asks, what are your expectations for the receiving room? And do you think Fleming will struggle being the number 1 guy? And I know we've talked about the receivers a lot in the past, so I don't want to do too much of that. But just specifically Fleming, kind of taking over as wide receiver 1. He wasn't really tasked with that at Ohio State. He always had, some first round talents ahead of him. And now he's kind of the guy in the room. I think he's kind of the clear number one at this point. Do you guys think he'll be able to handle that, or do you think it'll be too much for him?
Yeah, so for me, I don't really think Fleming's the clear-cut number one. Obviously, he was on Team Blue during the blue-white game, which was not the strongest of players. Obviously, you had a lot of projected starters on Team White. So, and I don't think that's a knock on what we're going to see from him. I think he's definitely seeing snaps regardless. But you saw Bo Prabula, I think he only completed 5 passes. 3 of them went to Joey Schlaffer. I mean, Fleming, I think he caught a quick slant. But I don't think we saw enough for him to really get a gauge on if he's going to be the clear-cut one. And part of the reason I think for that is I don't think Franklin and the coaching staff really wanted to show much of, if any, film on him because for just other teams started checking out the game. But I just think because of the rapport that Trey Wallace has had with Drew just from this year so far, he went for 5 catches, 72 yards in the spring game. Obviously, you saw that performance in the fourth quarter against Ole Miss. And even players last year were talking about, even with KLS on the roster, they thought Trey Wallace was going to be that guy. So even if it's a 1A, 1B situation when they play West Virginia and Fleming has emerged and has proven himself in that receiving group, I think that's great. But right now, I'm going to lean Trey Wallace as the number one guy.
I think I'll take the other side of it. I think that Trey Wallace slots in as your number 2. I think usually you talk about a number 1 receiver. That's usually your X. I don't see Trey Wallace as an X. I don't think it's not him being a bad receiver. I just don't think he has the traits that brings him to the number 1 receiver status. And I think just because of that, I think Fleming is slotted in as an X by default. I mean, I think Fleming, I would put him as a Z in many other programs, but again, I don't think there's a lot of talent to work with. But you got Saunders is going to play in the slot probably. I mean, Liam Clifford, he's probably also going to play in the slot if he plays. I mean, Amari Evans didn't really show much, so I think he'll be in that position by default, and I think it won't be the most favorable position for him, but I think it's something he could work with, and I think it's something that doesn't require him to be the X that he would have to be at maybe Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, any receiver school.
Yeah, I think the other thing with Fleming, regardless of 1A, 1B, or even if he's not, which I don't see him being outside the top 2, regardless of what we've seen from him so far, just from the pedigree he's had, obviously what we've heard from himself and just the coaching staff so far. But he's going to be on the field because obviously he's behind so many talented guys at Ohio State, Olave, Marvin Harrison. But he was one of the best run blocking wide receivers in all of college football. So especially if you've got Kayshon and Nick, and obviously they've proven to lean on the run. Obviously, we don't know what it's going to look like with Colton Ecke. But I just think you're going to have him on the field regardless, and he's going to prove to be just a force in the run game, blocking on the outside, regardless of what we see from him in the receiving game.
That's a good point. He is going to contribute a lot in the blocking game. But I mean, to your point, Lyle, Penn State hasn't had a great history of bringing in transfers. Because I know there were a lot of people who thought Dante Cephas could be wide receiver 1 this year. That didn't necessarily pan out. Malik McClain was here for a year. Now he's in the portal. So, yeah, I mean, Penn State hasn't always had success bringing in guys. Really, we haven't seen a transfer come in and contribute at that position. I guess Mitchell Tinsley did it. So it has been done, but he was like, I want to say 500 yards and was like wide receiver 1 or 2, kind of depends how you look at it there. But like nothing like what Fleming is expected to do. Because I think the expectation for Fleming right now, at least from the fan base, is that he's going to be up near 1,000 yards this year, leading the team in receptions. You can argue how realistic you think that is. I mean, he had a season at Ohio State with 500 or 600 yards, and I think he can definitely match that again. But yeah, I mean, there are some high expectations on him, but again, we've seen before, like with Cephas coming in, we've seen receivers come in with those expectations that just didn't pan out for whatever reason. I personally do think it'll work out better this time. I think we've heard a lot of good stuff from Fleming, and the coaches are always going to say good things about their players. They're never going to talk bad about any player on the roster, but the way that they've talked about Fleming is kind of different from your generic, like, yeah, we like what we've seen from him. We think he's going to be a contributor. We've heard, a lot of things about how he came in. He was kind of quieter at first, but just put his head down, went to work, kind of earned the respect of the guys in the room, and then developed into more of a vocal leader, really been making an impact on the guys and kind of taking over. It just feels like He's been fitting in really well here, coming back to his home state, everything like that. I think the stage is set for him to have a pretty big year. I don't know about 1,000 yards necessarily, but I think he should definitely have that wide receiver one position locked down. And if he doesn't, then I feel like something's gone wrong there.
Even like at Penn State, you don't have to be that 1,000-yard receiver anyway to be that, especially in Kotelnicki's system. I mean, at Kansas, I think his highest receiver caught almost 800 yards, and that was on like 44 catches. So that's just mostly yak, a lot of getting in space, things like that, which obviously we know of Kotelnicki's system. So I think he'll get a lot of or more chance for big plays than he has in the past. But I still think him being a 600 or 700-yard receiver is what to expect. And I think that's not a bad thing, considering they'll probably be running the ball day long, especially when they're rolling.
Yeah. I think it's a win if he hits 600, 700 yards, because it's also not like they're going to force the tight ends out of the game, considering you're trying to prove something at wide receiver. You saw what Tyler Warren can do. Obviously, he didn't play in the blue-white game, but we've seen it during his career. And other than Trey Wallace, Drew, I think, targeted Rapelier the most during that game. I think he's going to emerge as the tight end too. Obviously, we saw him when they did like that 2-minute drill kind of thing. He looked for him in the red zone, obviously overshot him. And then he had the lone passing touchdown in the spring game. It was like, I think, 27 yards. He caught him in the back corner. So I think regardless of what you see from the wide, I think if Trey Wallace and Julian Fleming both hit 600 yards, I think that's a win, because tight ends, I think they're going to be running a lot more tight end sets considering what they have at wide receiver.
Thank you guys for watching this episode of the One and Know podcast. I'm Joel Haas.
I'm Avery Hill.
And I'm Lyle Alenstein.
We'll see you guys in the next episode. If you want more football coverage, you can go to psucollegian.com and follow us on socials. See you.
See ya.